Once upon a time, before badge engineering, the British motor industry made cars with a panache and confidence which led the world. Dozens of makes and a range of models which made customers dizzy with choice. Cars that some would say really looked like cars. There was a golden age of motoring between 1920 and the outbreak of war in 1939. Its momentum carried the British motor industry through till around 1960. We made sports cars, we made tourers, we made saloons, we made coupes, we made limousines, landaulettes and sedanka de villes. The craft of the coach builder thrived and the automobile as art arrived. Good old days? Maybe. Simpler? Certainly. No worries about pollution, about lead in petrol, congestion, parking meters, traffic wardens or wheel clamps. No motorway madness, no miles-long tailbacks. Looking back from the restrictions, the concerns and the frustrations of 1990 motoring, the cars that survived from that golden age, lovingly restored by an ever-increasing band of enthusiasts, have added charisma because they are symbols of what motoring used to be. Motoring used to be about freedom. Freedom of the road, cruising on almost empty, winding A roads at a steady 40 to 45, waving and smiling when you met another driver with the good sense to drive the same make of car as you. It was acknowledging the salute of the AA or RAC patrolman on his motorcycle combination as his keen eyes noticed the solid metal badge on your badge bar. It was when a stretch of dual carriageway was an event, when you could open her up to 60 and boast about 65 to your pals. Motoring was open tourer summers, flat hats and scarves, picnics and tea rooms, and hedgerows and signposts that pointed. Motoring was Brooklands and Donington, the Shelsley Walsh hill climb, the world land speed record, superchargers and streamlining, when Britain was great, and we had great British cars. The 30s belonged to Austin. More than any other car of its time, the dependable Austin was a reflection of the English social life of the period. The Austin was a car for the middle classes, a car, as the cover of this catalogue suggests, for business, for pleasure, and for sport, leisure not yet having entered the vocabulary. The Austin advertising also appealed to middle-class values, with the famous slogan, "You buy a car, but you invest in an Austin." The names of the cars astutely reflective the snobbish nature of the intended market. The posh five-seater 20 Whitehall saloon was particularly attractive to the motorist who likes a high-powered saloon, affording every comfort and possessing everything to be desired in acceleration and speed. The 16 Barclays Saloon Deluxe was a smooth, big family car with lots of ventilation via the sunshine roof and 6 opening windows. The 16 Westminster Saloon was rather more sporty in appearance, but for the fresh air fiend, the Austin 16 range featured the Harrow 2-seater and the open road 4-seater Tourers. All the 6-cylinder 16 models were also available as 4-cylinder 12s. For rear-seat passengers who appreciated that extra touch of luxury, the saloons boasted fold-down picnic tables and pull-down footrests. 16 meant 16 RAC-style horsepower, and 12 meant 12 horsepower. Actually, 15.9 for the 16 and 12.8 for the 12. Horsepower rating was important because at the time road tax was levied at £1 per horsepower per annum. In 1934, the 16 was available with an 18 horsepower engine for those who wanted even more performance. This was so popular that Austin dropped the 16 for the 1937 season. Working out your RAC horsepower rating was easy. You simply square the bore, multiply the result by the number of cylinders, and divide that by 2.5. In the 30s, any schoolboy could do it. The 20s and 16s were usually chauffeur-driven. For more exclusivity, you could choose from a range of special coach-built bodies by the Gordon Company. These could be built on most of the Austin chassis. This is a Swish 20 limousine. This a 16 Sportsman Saloon. And this a rather smart Light 12. The owner-driver, who generally did a good deal of his own maintenance, could take his choice from a wide range of lighter cars: the Light 12-6 Harley Saloon, the Light 12-6 2-seater, the Light 12-6 Saloon, and the Light 12-6 Open Road Tourer. As before, these models were also available with 4-cylinder engines. How about this for cutting a dash? Special 6-cylinder engines and a distinctive radiator cowl marked out the rakish Austin Sportsters. This is the Newbury Open Sports Tourer. And this, the Kempton Sports Saloon, for days at the races, presumably. The 4 cars featured in this programme represent the popular cars of the Austin range in the 30s. In chronological order, we have the 1935 Light 12-6 Eaton 2-seater Tourer with dicky, the 1937 Cambridge Deluxe 10 horsepower Saloon, and the 1938 Goodwood Deluxe 14 horsepower Saloon, which, as you've been listening carefully, you'll know was 15.9 horsepower. And the very last production version of the famous Austin 10, introduced in 1939, used as a forces workhorse during World War II and relaunched in 1946. We are featuring the rare 10 Open Tourer, produced for just a few months before the outbreak of war. So what were they like to drive, these cars from the golden age of motoring? Let's find out with Roy Jackson Moore as our guide. First, the Eaton 2-seat Tourer with dicky, or rumble seat if you're an American.
The Austin 12-6 was introduced in 1931, and this particular car is a 1935 model, purchased in London on October the 10th, 1935, by a Miss Mary Lambert. The colour is dove grey with straw coach lines. Black wire wheels were standard. We're now in top gear, accelerating through 30 miles an hour. Up through 35, and now 40. The car has a top speed of 65 miles an hour and can be driven in top gear from 10 miles an hour. This top gear flexibility made the Eaton a very popular car with the ladies. On that right-hand bend, we steer into the corner and we steer out of the corner, because there's very little caster action or self-centering on the steering. This is the same on all the Austins we'll be driving. The suspension is quite firm, there's very little body roll, most of the weight being below the waistline. The steering is quite light as long as the car is moving. The tyres are narrow by modern standards, but provide adequate grip in most conditions. We're coming up to a hill now, about 1 in 10. We're slowing down so we engage third speed. We did that at about 30 miles an hour. Over the brow and back into top gear up to 40 miles an hour. There's a long sweeping left-hand bend coming up, and in dry weather we can go as fast as we like. On a wet road we'd experience some oversteer, so a little more caution would be advisable. The car's maximum cruising speed tends to be governed by the road surface and by the suspension. There's a main road coming up, so we'll slow down. There are no hydraulic brakes, just Austin mechanicals. In an emergency, these require a good hard push. Hydraulic brakes were introduced by Austin in their post-war range of cars. And we stop. We engage second speed, first with the steep hills and emergencies, and drive smoothly away. A comfortable cruising speed in this car is between 45 and 55 miles an hour. The fuel consumption 25 to 28 miles to the gallon, and the car uses oil at 3 to 4 pints every 1,000 miles. The Eaton was supplied with leather upholstery and a full toolkit. In 1935 it cost £215 ex-works. The delivery charge to London, about 30 bob.
It's the look of these cars that fascinates. The proportions seem so right. The lines, the voluptuous curves, the long bonnet, the headlamps making a statement. With these Austins, the looks are not accidental. An Italian was responsible for those curves. Herbert Austin hired Riccardo Busi from Lancia in 1929, and he was responsible for Austin design right up to the early 60s. The Austin 10 Cambridge Saloon is a classic 30s shape, from the stylishly cowled radiator to the slightly raked opening flat windscreen. The swept tail provided luggage space and housed the spare wheel. The lid of the luggage compartment, when lowered, formed an additional flat platform for the carrying of larger loads. Styling also meant practicality. These bonnet vents could be opened in hot weather to provide additional cooling for the engine compartment. The running boards, apart from being useful to the occasional bobby to follow that car, also kept the mud off the bodywork. They began to disappear as car bodies became wider. This near-side stop and tail light was added to comply with today's traffic laws. The lifespan of an Austin model was 2 to 3 years, and an annual facelift was normal. In 1938, the production genius Leonard Lord was appointed works director, and his new range signaled the beginning of an American influence in styling, seen particularly in the radiator shape of the 10 Tourer. The larger Austin saloons were popular with the professional classes. The Goodwood 14 was regarded as being one of the best Austin designs. The longer bonnet suited Boosie's flowing lines particularly well. And to drive, Roy Jackson Moore.
The Goodwood was developed from the 12.6 15.9 horsepower car. The power was increased at the end of 1937, and this car was one of the first batch fitted with the new engine. No less than 52 brake horsepower was available from 1.7 litres. Top speed went up to 70 miles an hour, and acceleration was considered to be brisk. The 0 to 50 time taking just over 21 seconds. ETU 166 was delivered on the 11th of April 1938 to Miss Jean Ann Burgess in Cheshire. She kept the car for 28 years before passing it on to her chauffeur. We're cruising at 45 miles an hour in the car's very flexible top gear. It's a very hot day and I've got the windscreen slightly open to increase the ventilation. The Goodwood is quiet and comfortable to travel in, 200 miles a day not being at all unreasonable. Suspension is softer than the Eton. The leaf springs are considerably longer, but there is a certain amount of roll on corners. The smaller wheels and larger low-pressure tyres contribute to the more comfortable ride. This improves the road holding, which makes the Goodwood a safe and predictable car. The hill's coming up now, so we change down to third speed. Foot down, and over the top at about 30 miles an hour. Into top, up to 35, down the hill and ready for the left-hand bend at the bottom. Speed now about 45, which we'll maintain all the way round. The steering is reasonably light, with 2.5 turns lock to lock. Rather heavy to park though. There's no caster action, but the car does tend to run straight. The brakes are Girling. These are lighter and more progressive than the Eatons. We're coming up to the main road now, so let's use them. We pull away in second speed. We've got synchromesh on second, third and top. Through the gears now up to cruising speed. This is a very comfortable 50 in top, with the engine turning over at just over 3,000 RPM. The Goodwood is a very comfortable 4-seater. 5 if you fold the centre armrest down. Seats are leather. The car was available in 8 Austin colours: black, green, 3 blues, Royal Princess and Bluebird, Pueblo brown, grey and maroon. You get 25 miles to the gallon touring. Oil consumption 2 to 3 pints per 1,000 miles, just like the Eton. Price in 1938 was £260 for the deluxe saloon. If you didn't want the sunshine roof, you could save yourself £10.
Let's take a look at how the Austins were equipped. The Goodwood came complete with a fitted suitcase to maximise every available inch of luggage space. Notice the spare wheel housed beneath. No pulling out the luggage if you had a puncture. There are large doors to allow easy entry, and they all close to the centre pillar. The interior is fully carpeted, and the rear seat passengers have the luxury of a pull-down carpeted footrest. Both front seats are individually adjustable over a 7-inch range. The very large sliding roof opens and closes quickly and easily to cope with the English summer, and full air conditioning is provided just by turning a handle. The ignition and lighting switches are combined, and the steering column is fully adjustable for reach. The turn signal switch is located in the centre of the steering wheel, and the indicators are of the semaphore variety. With the ignition switch on, the dependable Austin starts at the press of a button. The dip switch is foot operated, and the foot controls are conventional. Before the advent of the dipping rear view mirror, and in order to save you being dazzled by the headlights of following cars at night, all Austin saloons were equipped with a pull-up rear window blind operated by the driver. It was very effective, but it did restrict the rear vision. It's a lovely summer's day, so let's go on a picnic. The hamper can go in the dicky seat. Here comes Father and Amanda. Is it going to rain? Father thinks he'll take a chance and put the top down. Down it comes, in one, in one, in one, in one easy action. Now for the side windows. Where is Father going to put them? Inside the doors, of course. Well, they'll be kept dry and be instantly available in case it rains. Now for the other one. They'll soon be off now. Oh dear, the battery's flat. What are they going to do? Of course, young Charlie will have to use the starting handle. One turn to get her started. And it's back to the dicky for Charlie. And off they go. Have a nice day. And now for one of the most popular family saloons of the era, the famous Austin 10, which sold in the thousands between 1932 and the outbreak of war in September 1939. In the driving seat, Roy Jackson Moore.
This particular car started life on the 3rd of February 1938, when it was bought by the Crittall Manufacturing Company of Braintree, Essex, probably for one of their commercial travellers. The car is a scaled-down version of the Goodwood saloon. In 1938, the 10 horsepower engine developed 27 brake horsepower, which gave the car a top speed of 60 miles an hour. We're now happily cruising at 40. With the smaller engine, more use has to be made of the synchromesh gearbox in order to achieve good acceleration. The 0 to 50 time is under 30 seconds. Still in top gear for the corners. There's some body roll because the suspension is relatively soft. Steering is quite light and responsive, and is fairly neutral. You only get axle tramp and oversteer on very bumpy roads with sharp corners, or when you're driving rather too fast for the conditions. The driving position is good. Visibility is also generally good, although rear view is somewhat restricted by the divided window. Now for our 1 in 10 hill. Into third and foot right down at about 30. Up we go. Over the brow and into top, ready for the long left-hand bend. We've got appreciable body lean here because we're doing over 40 miles an hour through the corner. There's a lot more to do driving these cars compared to the modern family saloon, but that's where the fun lies. You can feel the road surface through the steering wheel, and you have to anticipate your braking rather more, although the Girling brakes can produce a 1G stop from 30 miles an hour. Second gear and through third into top at about 30 miles an hour. We're now up to about 40. The usual open road cruising speed would be around 50 to 55 miles an hour. The 6-gallon tank will take you more than 200 miles. That's about 35 to the gallon, at 1 shilling and 6pence old money. The cross-ply tires of the 30s would last about 25,000 miles. The majority of owners carried out a lot of their own maintenance. They decarbonised the cylinder head and reground the valves about once a year, using tools from the toolkit supplied with the car. Leather upholstery was standard, and the same 8 body colours were available on the 10 as on the 14. Price in 1938, £178 ex-works.
These Austins were well engineered. Simplicity was a keynote. The engineering policy laid down by Herbert Austin was sound and conservative engineering with no innovation introduced before being exhaustively tested. The simplicity is apparent in the engine bay, almost a walk-in engine room. The large Zenith carburettor sits underneath the even larger air filter. The air filter provided induction silencing, and as of the oil-wetted wire mesh variety, it had to be regularly cleaned in petrol or paraffin and re-oiled. This is the other side of the engine. Notice the large diameter hose leading from the radiator to the cylinder head. Cooling was by thermosiphon. The oil filler is at the bottom. The dynamo mounting provided the adjustment for the fan belt. A 2-blade cooling fan was standard, a 4-blade fan was available for hot climates. The coil was always mounted this way on Austins to avoid problems with dampness and condensation. Above and to the right is the horn. The distributor was skew gear driven from the camshaft. Adjustment of the contact breaker points was part of the owner's routine maintenance. The spark plugs are very easy to remove for inspection. The original equipment spark plugs could be taken apart for cleaning. The brass radiator cap is on the same side as the oil filler, as both would be checked daily. The jack, wheel brace and the full set of tools were stored under the bonnet. Here we can see why the 1939-10 bonnet was known as the alligator bonnet. It was the first front-opening Austin bonnet which was held open by a prop. The four-cylinder engine was very similar to the six and shared many components. The cooling was still by thermosiphon in 1939, although a water pump was included in the War Department specification model used by the armed forces. The 10 has a very clear and easy-to-read set of instruments. The dashboard is painted metal with a very deep glove compartment on the left. The pedals are well spaced and in the conventional layout. The gear positions are moulded into the rubber gearbox cover. The headlamp dip switch is to the left of the clutch pedal. With the 1939 10, the handbrake was moved to the floor between the front seats. Now for a closer look at the dashboard. The starter has changed to a pull type to eliminate the solenoid. The ignition and light switches were combined in one unit on all Austins of this period. The speedometer is clearly marked at 30 miles an hour to remind drivers of the then recently introduced 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. To the left of the steering wheel, a matching size cluster of 3 gauges show oil pressure, fuel content and amperes. Strong and simple, properly maintained, your Austin would give you years of reliable service. The 1939 10 Open Tourer, surely one of the best-looking cars ever produced by the Austin Motor Company. Does it drive as it looks? Roy Jackson Moore's in the driving seat, so let's find out.
The 10 Open Tourer is a rare car. Less than 100 of them were made before the war. The car I'm driving is particularly interesting. One of the veteran Austin engineers thought it was originally a test vehicle fitted with a Centrex supercharger. If the war hadn't intervened, Austin would have released the supercharged version in 1940. The car was then sold to the Archdeacon of Norwich on March the 11th of that year. It's a very pretty car with a top speed of around 65 miles an hour. The engine power is up on the previous model, another 5 brake horsepower. It's also lighter than the saloon, so acceleration is improved. There are no records of what it was like with the supercharger, but it would probably have been capable of 80 miles an hour. In 1939, there was still no caster action on the steering. So, just like other Austins, you have to steer in and steer out of the corners. The steering is very positive and direct. The ride is firm, but very much better controlled. This is one of the first Austins to be fitted with piston-type hydraulic shock absorbers. The front shock absorbers are mounted transversely, so they give some measure of anti-roll. This makes the cornering very much flatter. So this car can corner rather faster than the previous 10. Into third for the hill. And over the crest at about 35 miles an hour. Into top and up to 45 now. Let's see what she's like through the sweeping left-hand bend. That was very stable, hardly a trace of roll. We weren't going fast enough to make the car oversteer. We'd need at least another 10 miles an hour for that. This car is also fitted with improved Girling brakes, still mechanically operated. They're more powerful and more progressive and require less pedal pressure. Smoothly away in second speed, up through third into top. The car will cruise all day at 55, returning about 35 miles to the gallon. This is real wind in the hair motoring, particularly for the back seat passengers. You need a hot sunny day like this to really appreciate it. The top pulls up in one movement and the side screens are stowed behind the back seat. This also provides access to the luggage space. There is no opening boot. The spare wheel and toolkit are kept in a separate compartment behind the number plate panel. Only 3 body colours are available: black, bluebird blue and maroon. The 0 to 50 time is 26.8 seconds and the top speed a good 65 miles an hour. The price in 1939 was the princely sum of £175 ex-works. The
1939 Austin 10 chassis stayed in production throughout the war and all the way until the introduction of the A40 in 1948. It was light and strong, a complete welded unit with good diagonal stiffness. The lateral and diagonal rigidity of the structure played an important part in providing good road holding. The front part of the chassis frame and the cross members are completely boxed, and the front of this section is also diagonally braced. The power unit is mounted at 3 points using special live rubber mounts. This exploded view of the top half of the 10 engine clearly shows the thermosiphon cooling system, the much quieter large barrel-type tappets, and the vertically mounted spark plugs. The pistons and cylinder head are aluminium. The crankshaft has 3 main bearings, and a wet sump is used in conjunction with a gear oil pump for lubrication. The maximum brake horsepower was 32, produced at 4,000 revs per minute. All the engine's reciprocating parts were balanced prior to assembly. The engine and gearbox form one unit, and there is synchromesh on second, third and top gears. The clutch on the 1939-10 was an improvement, being lighter with longer travel, much easier to use with a more progressive bite. The specification calls it sweet. Overall, the 10 engine and chassis set the tone for Austin engineering until Leonard Lord introduced the unitary body to Austin with the Somerset in 1952. Prior to the 1939-10, all Austins had girder chassis. This detail from a 1938 catalogue shows the propeller shaft and differential, solid live back axle, the rear semi-elliptic leaf spring, and double-acting Luvax hydraulic shock absorber. The drum brakes here are Girling, wedge and roller. This illustration shows the hourglass steering mechanism. Operated by worm and sector, this provided light, responsive and progressive steering each side of the straight ahead position. The rake of the steering column could also be adjusted at this point. Here we can clearly see the live rubber engine mount. This is made of a special natural rubber with excellent vibration insulation properties. Also in close-up is one of the Luvax hydraulic shock absorbers. Just behind the gearbox position, the girder chassis was strengthened with this cruciform frame bracing. 2 6-volt batteries wired in series were used to provide 12 volts for the electrical system. Single 12-volt batteries were introduced on the new Austin 10. Austin used the girder chassis for 33 years. The welded platform chassis introduced on the 10 lasted just 9 years. Austins of the 1930s, these cars are like time capsules. Motoring history come alive, the romance of the open road. Cars that have to be driven, not sat in and pointed. Days when motorist was still faintly flavoured with intrepid, adventurous, romantic. To many of us, especially those who bought and drove these cars, Austin means home counties, bitumen, rhododendrons. It also means Battle of Britain and post-war austerity. But the really interesting thing is that these cars are still eminently drivable in 1990, easily keeping up with town and country traffic and cruising happily on motorways between 55 and 65. The increase in journey times is hardly noticeable. And from today's standpoint of electronic complexity, with computerized engine management systems and Starship Enterprise instrument displays, these Austins represent a simpler kind of life, which can be sampled and savoured just by getting in and driving off.